tonight we will be going through, the town manager will be presenting her budget recommendations. And after that, certainly there'll be opportunities to ask questions of the town manager regarding her budget recommendations. Prior to that, just some communications going on. I do have a copy of the Beacon. I'm not sure which way I should be handing it down.
I'm getting it this time.
Okay. The other communication I had was from, and actually I'm just going to be seeking some clarification from Heather on this, but we overspent our PD line, or our meeting line, which had to be made up with a transfer from our advertising line. And the recommendation was made that if there are people on this committee that anticipate going to some of the meetings in the future, we should probably have a discussion at some point about what that's going to mean for next year. The clarification I'm looking for is, do I just sign that, or do I need to bring that back as an item for the committee to vote on the transfer, because it's a departmental, intra-departmental transfer?
It wouldn't hurt to vote. I say it never hurts to vote.
Okay, then I'll just...
Required. We need to transfer the money.
Yeah, no, okay, so then what I'll do is I'll put it on a future agenda, and we'll have a vote on that. I just wasn't sure if I just needed to sign it, or if we needed to take it up. And then with that, I'll ask if there's any public comment from anybody on the committee.
I do. A couple of comments. First of all, if you're watching at home, I assure you this meeting is being recorded and you can watch it on YouTube. You should put the popcorn down, turn off your TV, and go to Lunenburg Middle High School to watch
That's right.
to watch the competitive class plays in their encore performance tonight. Last night, the class of 2022 scored an upset win. The sophomores won the competitive class plays, as well as Best Actor and Actress from the sophomore class. They did an outstanding, all the classes were excellent, but it was a fantastic night, and it's something that everybody in the town of Lunenburg should check out, if not live. I'm sure it was recorded and will be available on public access cable. Secondly, I wanted to acknowledge the service of Selectman Phyllis Luck. Not somebody who I usually find myself agreeing with, but I certainly appreciate her steadfast service to the town for many years. And finally, I just wanted to say that, over the course of the last 3 weeks, since the town manager and the superintendent presented their forecast, an awful lot of discussion has been spurred in town. Some of it constructive, some of it not particularly constructive in my opinion, but it did really what we wanted it to do, or what I had hoped anyway, which was to get a conversation going and to get a balanced conversation about the strategic needs of the town, and to get people thinking about all of the various ways that we spend money, the effect of things like debt service, both inside and outside the levy limit, and what our needs are going to be over the course of the next several years. And I think we need to be clear-eyed and very thoughtful about how we're going to strategically approach these challenges over the next several years. And so with that in mind, I want to make a couple of suggestions. Number one is to revisit an idea that we had floated back in the late summer and early fall, which is think about the 5-year forecast perhaps, and revisiting it out of sequence. So rather than doing it as a early to mid-January exercise, which then we immediately forget about as we get into the next fiscal year budget, not to look at again until the following year's forecast, we actually do a deliberation around the forecast and think about what we should be doing from a policy perspective to support the forecast and some of the strategic needs of the town. And perhaps that's something that we should be looking at immediately following town meeting, and do it off-cycle as perhaps a spring and summer project. And the other thing I think that we need to do, perhaps in partnership with the Board of Selectmen, is we need a debt project. And we need to take a very comprehensive view of our debt. We need to look at both inside and outside of levy limit debt, both what we have today for debt, our current service, what our service is projected to be with the elimination of some of the debts that we will be discharging over the course of the next several years, but also with an eye to some of the projects that are either currently being planned in early stages of planning, or are the inkling of various people's eyes in town. And I think some people think that some of this debt spending is a fait accompli. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think that we need to have a healthy conversation as a town about what kind of debt we think we should be taking on, and if we don't take on debt, what that could perhaps free us up to do in other areas. So I'd like to look at that as part of a multi-meeting study or conversation that perhaps we can lead, and hopefully with the cooperation of the Board of Selectmen.
Right.
Dave?
Yeah, just got a quick one. I was out of town last week, but the TC Passios Building Design Committee did meet, and they selected a architect and engineering firm. So I'm assuming that once the negotiations are done with the final contract, we will have a kickoff meeting in the near future, and we'll hit the ground running with the evaluation of the building and trying to move forward towards whatever happens by town meeting.
Anybody else? Any public comment from anybody in the public? No public comment from the public? Okay, then with that takes care of our communications, and we'll move right into the town manager's presentation of the preliminary budget.
All right. Hello, everyone. So, this is the preliminary budget presentation. And so I just want to start off with a budget timeline to date. So the Finance Committee began budget discussions in July of 2019. The Capital Planning Committee began in September of 2019 and met with departments in November and December. And the town manager sent target budgets to departments in December, and that were due back on January 2nd. The Capital Planning Committee finalized their prioritization of projects for the fiscal 21 capital plan on January 7th. This plan was presented as well as the 5-year financial forecast at the end of January, and tonight we're here for the preliminary budget presentation. So in preparing the fiscal 21 recommendation, the goal was to create a balanced budget that funds operating budgets using recurring revenues at the current service levels with some exceptions. The original target budget used in December and preliminary budget uses conservative revenue projections. It meets the town's financial policies, and this uses certified free cash not to be used on the operating budget and abides by the town's financial policies by putting $679,133 of free cash towards capital, $110,000 of free cash towards the OPEB liability costs, $100,000 of free cash deposited into the regular stabilization account per the policy. Now, I know there wanted to be more discussion about what a target budget is, and we've discussed this some, so I'll start there. So on the revenue side, for property taxes, it included adding 2.5% to the previous year's levy, included $350,000 as the new growth estimate, and the current debt exclusion amounts. For state aid, in December, we did not have the governor's proposal, so we level funded from the current year. For local receipts, it included 2.27% increase over the previous year's estimate. And in other available funds, it did not address the use of free cash, and other sources of available funds are relatively similar to the previous year, except for it does not allocate money from the sale of cemetery lots, and it does include PEG funds for indirect costs. On the expenditure side, we level funded the cherry sheet offset number and the state and county charges number from the current fiscal year. and this includes choice and charter assessments. The departments were sent target budgets in December that included all contractual increases and level-funded other expense categories, with exceptions of, it included costs associated with an additional full-time patrolman and a career firefighter, the known audit costs, the estimate for the regional dispatch from the finance subcommittee, an additional $50,000 for pavement management, the known principal and interest debt payments for fiscal '21. That included 6.5% increase for health insurance for active and retirees, and included a 10% increase for Worcester County retirement, and it included 2.5% increase for Lunenburg Public Schools and Monty Tech. So the preliminary budget versus the target budget, these are the main differences. On the revenue side, the preliminary budget includes the governor's proposal, which was a 2.28% increase, and new growth, it assumes $234,000, and which is a number we'll talk a little bit more about, and will continue to monitor and adjust if needed. On the expenditure side, the cherry sheet offsets and state assessments were from the governor's proposal. For health insurance, it assumes a 3.7% increase for active employees and a 5% increase for retirees. And our actual health insurance renewals are received at the end of February. For liability and workers' comp insurance, it assumes that to be level funded, and our renewals are received in late March. For the Monty Tech assessment, it assumes a 2.5% increase, and our assessments are received at the beginning of March. For snow and ice, for the deficit for fiscal '20, if we're unable to cover the deficit with end of the year interdepartmental transfers, there is sufficient money, a balance in the free cash amount of $218,000 to help cover that deficit.
Excuse me, that is free cash that was certified in the current fiscal year?
Certified as of July 1st, 2019, so from the previous.
But presently unencumbered in this budget.
Yep.
Okay, so that's something that would have to be appropriated at town meeting to cover that?
If it's either appropriated, if it's not appropriated and there's an unexpended balance, it falls towards next year's.
That's free cash again.
It gets rolled into the balance, so at the end of the year, whatever remains.
Okay.
Yep. On the revenue side, there are 4 sources of revenues for the town, and they include property tax, state aid money, local receipts, and other available funds. So property tax includes residential, commercial, industrial, and personal property tax. And state aid includes Chapter 70 funding, unrestricted general government aid, among other categories. And local receipts includes motor vehicle excise, penalties and interest collected by the tax collector, fees from various permits and licenses from different departments, ambulance fees, solar net metering payments, fines, and the local option meals tax. Other available funds includes free cash, which is the unexpended balance from the previous fiscal year as certified by the Department of Revenue, unexpended capital, indirect costs, chargebacks to the sewer and cable for town services and their debt payments, as well as water enterprise, the revenue from the artificial turf revolving fund, and we also receive a payment each year from MSBA for an old school project. So this chart shows a breakdown of revenue source by percentage. Our largest percentage of revenues comes from property taxes at 66% of our total revenues. State aid is the second largest at 22%. Local receipts is 7%, and available funds 5% for this budget. So some noteworthy highlights for fiscal '21 are our property tax increase is significantly less due to the decline in new growth. The governor's state aid proposal is less than the fiscal '20 increase. The estimate for local receipts is conservative, as it has been in previous years, and the available funds reflects a significant decrease from the previous year, and this is primarily due to the amount of free cash in this proposed budget.
I beg your pardon, Heather, is there any reason, it's a 3-year trend now for the reduction in free cash, or in new growth, rather. Do you have any idea why that's happening? And I guess in back of the question is, should we expect it to recur?
Good question. When I sent out that notification of that I received the estimate from the assessors, the assessing group that we use, firm, that was a surprise to me, as well as the finance director, that would be such a significant decline. The explanation was essentially that we have less growth in condos and that type of a unit. So we're trending along the same amount for building permits. I believe it was 12 to 15 building permits, which is typical. But that was the primary reason. But we'll continue to look at that.
Thanks.
For property tax, when we look at the revenues we receive from property taxes, we take the prior year base at a maximum of 2.5% per Proposition 2.5, add in an estimate for property tax new growth, include the debt exclusion amounts, and we get our maximum allowable levy. And our maximum allowable levy for this budget is $28,685,707. So this is a slide with a 5-year, 6-year actually, history of our new growth. And the target budget, like I said, that we used to develop the baseline budget was $350,000 for new growth. And the recent estimate from RRG, our regional assessing firm, was $214,000. And I met with the lead assessor. He indicated we could bump that up $15,000 to $20,000, so that's what this number reflects. He thought that was still a conservative estimate. So state aid, this budget recommendation includes the governor's state aid proposal, which was released on January 22nd. And the proposal provides for an additional $155,185 in Chapter 70 funds, which is a 2% increase, and an additional $31,442 in unrestricted general government aid, which is a 2.8% increase. And the total estimate for fiscal '21 is $9,520,765, which is an overall increase of 2.28%. This slide is just to demonstrate a history of our state aid, how it's fluctuated, the percentages, and the growth over the previous year. So local receipts is another category of revenue, and the estimated local receipts for this budget is set to increase $68,450 or 2.27% over the previous year's estimates. And that includes motor vehicle excise, licenses, permits, fees, fines, investment income, all of which are elastic revenues. So that's why we keep them on the conservative side. So this slide is a detail of the actual receipts from fiscal 18 and fiscal 19 and the estimates used for fiscal 20 and 21. So for available funds, the revenue estimates for available funds includes the MSBA reimbursement amount of $535,051 for an old school building project, the indirect costs for town services and debt payments attributed to the sewer enterprise, water enterprise, and cable access enterprise, and the use of $46,473 from the artificial turf revolving fund to pay for associated costs for the artificial turf field debt for fiscal 21, and the use of $889,133 from free cash to offset the fiscal 21 capital plan, the OPEB trust fund, and deposit into the regular stabilization account. And this slide is just a breakdown of the available funds to show you the fiscal 18, 19, and 20 amounts, final amounts, and the estimates used for fiscal 21. So for fiscal 21 expenditures, expenditures are a reflection of the cost of providing a level of services to residents of all ages in our community, to visitors traveling or doing business in Lunenburg, and maintaining or improving our assets. As a town, we provide services to students, we provide health and human services to seniors and veterans, recreational services, and public safety to all. The balance is to provide the best services possible given the available resources, maintain our assets, and put aside funding for anticipated capital and into our rainy day fund. So expenditures are divided into functional categories that include general government, central purchasing, police, fire, other protection, DPW, solid waste, recycling, health and sanitation, council on aging, veterans, the Lunenburg Public Schools, Money Tech, the library, debt service, unclassified general government, and retirement assessment. It also includes cherry sheet offset charges and state and county charges. Also, on the expenditure side is the sewer enterprise, solid waste enterprise, and cable access, all of which are offset by the sewer betterments, bag fees, or subscriber fees. And the capital requests and other warrant articles that may have a financial impact also have to be included on the expenditure side, but are proposed to be offset by free cash.
Heather, could I interrupt for a second? This is where there's a skip in the pages in the presentation.
Oh,
That
Not-
that was
not
the same
ahead?
thing that happened at Board of Selectmen's meeting, I believe.
okay. Waiting to catch up. Okay.
There you go. Target budget highlights. Is that where you want to be?
There we go. Thank you. So in December, departments were sent budget documents and were asked to meet a target budget and included contractual increases for union employees, increases per the salary administration plan for non-union employees, and increases for staff with contractual agreements. The target budget level funded all expense categories. And this slide includes what the target budgets included in addition to that. For the police, it included an additional $72,000 for a full-time patrol officer, $77,000 for an additional career firefighter, $27,000 for an assessment increase for regional dispatch, $50,000 for pavement management, $520,000 for a 2.5% increase for the Lunenburg Public Schools, $19,000 for a 2.5% increase for Monty Tech, $135,000 or a 10% increase for Worcester Regional Retirement, and $154,000 or a 6.5% increase for health insurance. For the above target highlights that were beyond those amounts that departments came back with in requests, in general government, there was $40,000 more than the target for additional funds for election, census and registration workers, additional hours for the assistant town clerk, and increased software costs. For the fire department, there was an additional $21,000 for more than the target to increase on-call firefighter EMT accounts. For the DPW, there was an additional $22,000 for the cemetery. For the Board of Health, there was an additional $7,000 for additional hours for the Board of Health Administrative Assistant, and this is the second year this has been requested, as well as a 5% increase for Neshoba Health and Nursing. For the library, there was $37,000 more than the target for increases across most of their accounts. And for the Lunenburg Public Schools, the total original request, which was a 4% increase as of the end of December, was $295,000 over the target budget.
Okay, just to clarify, all right, these are the above target, meaning they are not currently in the preliminary budget?
I'm getting there.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Next slide. For the preliminary budget, the general government funds the target and above target requests for additional hours for the assistant town clerk, addresses election, census, and registration worker salaries, new voting booths, and the increase in software costs. For the police, it funds the requested budget, which was the target budget for an additional full-time patrol officer, but the bottom line is less than the target due to other cuts that were made in that department, particularly the shift differential and the payroll lockup accounts. For the fire, it funds the target budget and 6,000 of above target requests. For the DPW, it includes an additional 50,000 for the pavement management, an additional 20,000 for facilities, an additional 10,000 for cemetery, but this was done by eliminating the assistant town mechanic position, which was an overall decrease of 40,000. So those funds were reallocated for that budget, as well as cuts to the electricity account by 8,000.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is the $50,000 for pavement management, is that over and above what we had already agreed to by policy? We were going to do
No,
an
so
incremental.
it's the incremental increase for the next fiscal
That's
year
it.
of 50,000.
That is
Yes,
it. Okay.
that is it. Health insurance is currently reduced to a maximum of 3.7% increase, or $116,183, and the actual renewal is the end of February. And this also, just to point out, it includes health insurance for the additional police and fire personnel, which it's approximately 19,000 each within the health insurance number for those additional staff. So I just want to point that out, those,
19,000 each would be assuming a family plan?
yes.
Okay.
Correct. For the Lunenburg Public Schools, the preliminary recommendation is a 2.5% increase. Due to the reduction in health insurance from 6.5 to 3.7, the superintendent's proposed budget decreased from a 4% to a 3.64% increase, or 219,000 more than the target. So overall, the fiscal '21 budget for operating expenses is projected to increase $1,164,402, which is a 2.9% increase. The largest increase is for the Lunenburg Public Schools out of that amount for $519,897, which is 45% of the increase. The next highest is Worcester County Regional Retirement, which is $147,791, or 13% of the increase. Unclassified general government is $131,888, or 11% of the increase, and that's using the 3.7% increase for active employees and 5% for retirees. And the debt service is decreasing at this point in time for $91,181, and central purchasing is decreasing by $4,023.
The debt service reduction, is that exempt or non-exempt?
So it's overall, but it's primarily exempt.
John?
And Heather, I don't see on this list capital. So this is operating expenditures?
Yes.
Okay.
But we can,
But that's,
we're tracking debt service as part of I guess this includes both excluded and non-excluded debt
Right.
in these
Yeah,
numbers.
so
Okay.
that would be part of, to the extent that we're paying capital through that.
Do we
yeah.
break that out at some point?
I can, it's not in these slides.
Okay. No, it's not urgent.
Oh, there's a slide on our debt
Next page, I
schedule.
think, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you'd be able to see it. Okay, for expenditures, non-discretionary debt service, this slide is a detail of the total debt service, $4,590,491. And the offsets include funds from the sewer for their debts, as well as water and the MSBA payment. And this slide is our current debt schedule. So that's just I know you're familiar with that slide, the color-coded slide.
Heather, could I interrupt for 1 second? The debt service that we'll be taking on probably in April, or actually, it'll flow over into '21. Is there a number plugged in here somewhere to anticipate that?
For the Saliba property
property.
and the ladder truck, yes.
Okay, thank you.
But there will be final bond for the middle school, high school project. We've been waiting on the MSBA to do their final audit, as well as the pavement management, the remainder of that. So that will be going out for final bond. Sure.
But we still end up with our debt service dropping.
No, once those go into
Once those
effect.
kick in, then it's gonna-
Yeah, it will.
Okay.
I don't know the amounts. Maybe Karen can address that at a later time.
Thank you.
For non-discretionary accounts for the general government unclassified, the liability, police, fire, injured on duty, and workers' comp are level funded based on actual expenditures for fiscal 19 and 20, and we have a history, and this is based on because we have a history of reward and participation credits that we're able to level fund those accounts. The health insurance renewal estimate is a 3.7% increase for active and 5% for retirees. And of this amount, 38% of the health insurance budget is active town employees, 62% is retiree for health insurance for both town and school. The active portion is approximately $966,000 out of the $2.489 million. And school retirees account for $1.088 million, and the town retirees account for $413,000 approximately. The retirees renewals on a calendar year basis and is based on a 5% increase for MedX 2, Managed Blue, and Medicare. And just want to point out, in fiscal 19, we renegotiated our public employee committee agreement, and that those plan design changes that went into effect helped reduce our current and retiree health insurance at the time, which is continuing to benefit the town. For non-appropriated expenditures, there's the cherry sheet charges, cherry sheet offsets, funds from the overlay, and tax title. So some noteworthy highlights: the cherry sheet charges decreased with the governor's proposal, and the cherry sheet offsets increased from the previous fiscal year. And the overlay and tax title amounts are level funded. The tax title amount, I would recommend that we revisit at some point. The tax collector requested not much, but some additional funds to move properties into foreclosure. For capital, OPEB, and stabilization, for capital articles, the total for the capital plan for fiscal 21 is $1,329,133. And the OPEB, the amount being recommended to deposit per the town's policy is $110,000 out of free cash, and $100,000 out of free cash into the special purpose, the stabilization, regular stabilization account. And that's per policy as well. The fiscal 21 capital plan recommendation includes funding for all the priority recommendations made by the capital planning committee. The capital planning committee received a total of 28 capital requests for over $4 million, and the recommendation is to fund 21 of those requests for a total of $1,329,133. The preliminary budget includes funding the capital plan with $650,000 from tax revenue and $679,133 from free cash. So recap the preliminary budget. It includes one additional police officer. It reduces payroll, lockup, and shift differential accounts by approximately $22,000 from the previous fiscal year. It includes one additional career firefighter. It adds 8 hours for the assistant town clerk and 6 hours for the Board of Health administrative assistant. It includes an education and enforcement coordinator position that is entirely funded with grant funds, and includes $50,000 for pavement management, adds $10,000 for the cemetery budget, eliminates the assistant town mechanic position, and cuts electricity costs by $8,000, not 88, and reallocates these funds by adding $27,000 for ADA public rights-of-way funding and an additional $20,000 for facilities. And as you go along in your review of the budgets, they'll have a more in-depth discussion on their needs. And
Okay, and then just to go back to, since I missed it going by, but the education and enforcement coordinator position that's
Yes.
grant funded, that's related to recycling?
yes,
And that's going to be a shared position? And that's not going to be necessarily a Lunenburg position?
correct.
It may be like contracted services with another town or
Yeah,
something?
that part hasn't been figured out yet. This is somewhat preliminary. It has been a discussion that our DEP regional coordinator is trying to get the area local towns. There's this grant through DEP for this position that we could share. For a part-time position, it's $30,000 that the 3 towns could share. Our requirement is a 25% match, which we have grant funds we can use towards that match. So it would be of no bottom line impact to the town. And the towns are Townsend and Harvard.
Okay.
Could I add another comment to that situation there? The Board of Health is a key player in this situation, and I know the town manager is going to be meeting with them in March.
Yep.
So they hold one of the keys to this position, and I'm not, at this point, we haven't met on it, so I can't comment from the board's perspective.
We did meet with the Board of Health last year to start discussing this. I don't know if you were at that meeting, Dave.
Yeah, I was at that meeting.
So they need to adopt comprehensive hauler regulations, which is how all the haulers, private haulers, are permitted in town through the Board of Health. And so that's a requirement of this grant.
Okay.
And so it would, one of the keys to it is those haulers would be required to provide bundled service, so not just trash. So a lot of times, I guess the options are you can choose to add recycling, where it's another cost to trash pickup. So this would be a requirement of those regulations. So that's one piece of it.
Okay, and I know that the Board of Health had come last year to present on increasing their clerical staff. But the assistant town clerk,
Yes,
the 8 hours is, what is she currently at?
24.
24? Okay, so this isn't going to add a day?
To,
Mostly from a personal perspective, I'm just, like thinking, well, it would be nice if they were open on Fridays so that I'm never late with my agenda.
no, she's not only at 24 hours, so we'll bring her to 32.
It's 24, we'll bring it to 32. Okay, thank you.
And Heather, just for to clarify things for me, the assistant town manager's mechanic's position is not filled.
Not filled.
We're not talking about cutting somebody.
No.
We're talking about just.
An unfilled position.
It's prospective. Okay, thanks.
One other comment, too, is the increase of the Board of Health hours, that doesn't change the benefit situation there, because she's already fully benefited.
She's already benefited.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry, we interrupted you early.
Where was I?
Okay.
So, to conclude, the budget includes the governor's budget proposal for state aid, which is subject to change. It fully funds all contractual obligations and increased costs for non-personnel related expenditures. It's balanced based on the use of recurring revenues for operating costs. There's no draw on the stabilization fund or free cash for operating expenses. And it maintains existing staff with a net 1 addition town employee. And the preliminary budget does not meet the superintendent's proposed budget, but the goal would be to revisit once the unknowns become more clear. And the recommended budget does not fully meet all the needs as requested by department heads. Budget does leave an unallocated balance of $135,000. So looking ahead, I just added some slides because there has been discussion both about the capacity to take on new debt. So the finance director, Karen Brochu, she put together this worksheet as far as what our capacity is at each of our financial policies, as so making sure the regular borrowing capacity is no more than 4%, what that number is, the excludable debt capacity at 11%, those figures, and the aggregate amounts. So that may tie into your discussion at a later date. This slide is, our chart shows you a look ahead at future years' tax rates using the projected base tax levy and excludable debt known at this time. And so given the current budget scenario, the tax rate would increase by 4 cents next year. So the budget calendar, the Finance Committee will begin a detailed review of the fiscal 21 budget beginning February 20th. The State House Ways and Means budget comes out at the end of April. The State Senate budget comes out at the end of May. Our town meeting is May 2nd. The annual town election is May 16th. And the state budget, the conference, that budget will come out by the end of June. And the state budget, state aid through the state budget is finalized by July. And the last slide is just there for everyone to see your schedule for the next couple of months. And I don't know if there's any questions.
Yeah, and then basically I would just ask people to take a look at that schedule, and if there's any nights that you potentially would not be here. I know that we have discussed, Peter was not going to be available to be present at the meeting. Was it the 27th?
Yeah, I actually emailed the town manager today about that. I'm going to be unable to attend on the 27th and the March 12th meetings, but I am going to try to participate remotely and have requested her assistance and the assistance from the technology office and PAC to make sure that we can make it work with sound with this room and that kind of thing. So
Do we have to have somebody on the board also, like
On the board?
wave him in when he wants to participate, or is this something that can be managed
We'll
from?
get you the rules of remote participation. So
Yeah, I just didn't know if somebody else here needed a device. I guess that was my question. I know that when the library committee had done it, they had somebody with a device would have.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of meetings that have been done in town. I haven't read the specific regulation, but I know that it's pretty common with the Conservation Commission in particular.
They Skype in.
And they just do it with a Skype session, and it's pretty easy, but when you're doing it in a small room around a table, it's one thing. When you're doing it on a stage with sound and television, it can be another thing.
The audio
so-
has to be clear for it to meet.
Right.
Right,
the
right,
meeting
right.
law.
Right, so I'm sure it's something that if we put our heads together, we can make it work. But
Yeah, we just
I
want
have
to make sure
trust
that we're
in
set
Steve
before.
and Cable to make it happen.
I don't remember which room it was in, but I know Conservation did it at least once with a cell phone, and every time the person at the remote location was speaking, the camera was focused on the cell phone. That may have been a Ritter. It was, yeah. Everybody got a chuckle every time it went up on the screen.
Okay, and then and I will say, and I know it's not directly impacting the budget, but I do like Peter's idea of doing some kind of a debt project. And actually, I would probably tie it with the 5-year forecast discussion. And it might be something that's worth timing right around the same time we did the symposium last year.
Sure.
Or do you
great
really want to
idea.
do it in the summer?
I don't have a strong opinion,
Okay.
I think I would go with the sense of the board, but my thinking on this is that the TC Passios Building Committee will be a year old come September, I believe you guys constituted.
September,
August or
October,
September. Yeah,
something like that.
So, and they're starting to get some momentum. And, my my feeling is that there's almost a fait accompli with that project. And I'm not sure that, at least in the last year or two, we've thought about that project within the confines of
Debt.
the financial
Right.
situation that the town is in.
Right.
To include our operating requirements and everything else.
Yep.
And I think that, and it's not just that, right? Because on the, not far behind that, we've got to consider Turkey Hill. There's other things that are, that are looming. And I think we need to have a real thoughtful discussion that includes all of this before we run, 90 miles an hour into massive debt exclusion to do a project that, albeit probably warranted, may sit outside of our financial capacity.
Sure. All right, and then the other question I had was whether or not it would be possible if, to get some sense of a trend of the free cash going
Yes.
forward, or an anticipation of it going
trend?
forward. Not
Yeah.
a trend, but some kind of
That's
a.
something hard to predict.
Yeah, and the only reason I'm asking is that I'm assuming that as regular debt service goes down, if free cash also goes down, then some of the capital plan would be addressed again through debt, I would assume. But I haven't seen something going forward. I haven't paid particular attention to what's coming down the road as far as capital.
Well, the trends in this budget from last is a decrease in use of tax revenues to fund the capital plan,
Right. But if
as far as a percentage of the total,
But if the free cash goes down,
right? We have
then
less available
the need for
resources.
potential debt goes up, potentially, depending on what's
Well,
coming down the road.
As far as down the road, the big thing that I've been worried about is how we pay for the Vertex.
Vertex, yeah.
And, we got 5 buildings that, Peter mentioned, TC Passios. So that's the big nut to crack, but we've got several things, so, yeah, that's one, then that's why it would be useful to have some sort of a plan, at least thought out.
Yeah. No, I think that would be good.
And I think that's why it's another reason it's important to keep our local receipt estimates conservative. Because that,
Well, that, and
Needs
when
an
you
arm
see
bottom
the new growth drop precipitously, I mean, from what we were anticipating, and that was already going down to another reduction. Okay, so, I'm sorry, are there questions from the committee?
I've got a couple of things, just for clarification on the capital plan. In your presentation, you mentioned that 21 out of 28 projects were funded. I just wanted to reiterate, and I have once before, and John, I think will agree, that those other 7 projects were Vertex.
yes.
Yep,
Estimates on year 1 and year 2, or at least year 1 projects. And there's a commitment to come forward, hopefully, with a capital project next year for envelope protection of town buildings, I think is the way it was described. So we'll put a bunch of small projects that will protect the buildings for the time being into one project, and that will encumber it will cover some of the Vertex recommendations also, as well as facilities on a yearly basis, trying to knock off a few of the real small ones. That's my understanding. I just wanted to reiterate that to the folks at home. The other thing I'd like to ask about is the cemetery request. I know it was originally 22,000, presently at 10,000 in the preliminary budget. My question is that going to become a separate line item under DPW, or is it going to be still lumped under facilities under DPW?
It's under cemetery, within DPW,
Okay.
but it's under the cemetery.
That's fine. I know the cemetery commissioners were hoping it would be that way. And these are expenditures that traditionally have come out of the town budget for maintenance and certain items at the cemetery during the years. It just was not separated out. Am I correct, or am I?
No, I mean, traditionally, they transfer money from the sale of cemetery lots at town meeting to cover projects.
Right, but it's my understanding that there have been expenses from year to year that have come out of DPW somewhere, but there's never been a cemetery line item for that number.
I would have to verify with the director. I know there's sharing of resources at the DPW,
Right.
so.
My point is that I feel separating it out gives us a better picture of our cost centers and what they actually cost. The more we can separate out these types of things, even though they're still under the DPW's umbrella, it gives us a cost that we can actually look at for cemeteries, and parks is already separated out. Anything that we can separate out in the budget and say, this is what we spend on this is what we spend on that, is more informative and more transparent. Thank you.
Peter?
I just have a few questions. Do you know why we're trending down almost $200,000 in motor vehicle excise funds?
I think you're looking at the estimates?
Yeah.
Okay, so the estimates, not the actuals for fiscal 20?
Yeah.
So it's the estimate, not the actual. And we don't have our actuals for fiscal 20 yet until that year closes. But you'll see from,
So it was a conservative estimate.
Yeah, so they projected what they projected last year was less than what they actually took in.
Oh, okay, I'm misreading this then. I understand. I think I understand. Okay. On the capital plan, I'm sure this will come up a number of times, but do we have any thoughts or expectations around perhaps finding some earmarks in the state budget for some of the capital items, like we did last year, the Flat Hill Culvert comes to
we
mind?
hope to. Yes, it's on the Tuesday's Board of Selectmen's meeting to discuss budget priorities to submit to our state delegation. And so hopeful that we'll have the same successes we have had.
Okay. I'd also note that our rates of increase on Chapter 70, despite a massive education bill that was just passed in the last couple of months in Boston, are actually trending lower
Yes.
than they have in previous years. And, I believe the superintendent made a comment in a recent school committee meeting. The state commissioner of education had commented that about 85% of the funding for the next fiscal year, for the coming fiscal year that are coming as a result of that education bill, is only going to 15 school districts in the state. And so you've got, massive amounts of funding flooding districts like Lowell, for example, that is going to see, about I believe a 7.5% increase to their overall budget as a result of that bill. But you have towns like Lunenburg that are actually seeing less in Chapter 70. And I understand why, and, we've stated it before in this meeting. I think that, morally that bill was the right thing to do. It's not something that Lunenburg is going to benefit from tremendously. But, I would certainly personally invite, and I would hope maybe the board would join me in inviting Senator Tran and Representative Hay to have a discussion about that at some point. Because I would like to know that we're getting our fair share.
Okay.
I had one more question. Earlier today, I was reviewing one of the two documents that you sent to us, and I don't seem to be able to pull out what I was looking for here right now. But I believe there was a comment about the library funding, that we were taking on funding of something that had previously been covered by the Friends of the Library, which is, I think, a very important move. Michelle has been tracking these types of things for quite a while now, and seeing the town picking up funding for things that could go away someday, I think is a good thing as we can do it.
Thank you for,
There's-
Yep.
yeah, bringing that up. So the facilities budget increase of 20,000, that's a reallocation of money within the budget due to the cuts, but 10 of that has already been earmarked for the library too, so the Friends group is not spending as much on the maintenance, so these are all maintenance and
Right.
projects at the library.
Yeah, the other very important thing in that same realm that I thought of this past week is that in addition to monies coming in from other sources to fund town functions, I think we might want to at some point expand into how much are our present employees doing that they're not getting paid for. Because there are a number of them in town government that attend evening meetings and do not get paid. They do have the option of taking comp time, but many do not. And those types of things, I think maybe we ought to be aware of some of that also. Because, you know, you have a dedicated member of town employee that's been with the town for 15, 20, 25 years and just does it as part of her job, his or her job. That person retires, you're not necessarily going to get that commitment from a new employee coming in, and you're going to have this unfunded piece of that job that may not get done.
John?
As well as all the grant funds that we receive to help supplement the budget.
John? Did you have?
Nope.
No? Michelle?
I think the only question I had was, firstly, thank you for a thoughtful presentation. Very nice to understand, very easy to understand. But for the capital plan, is it part, and maybe John, you can answer this, is it part of the process to try to do some grant research for funding any of this? Any of the capital projects?
Has not been here before. It probably should be.
Yeah, because I was looking at a couple of things, I thought, oh, that might qualify for a grant. I'm not a grant
Yeah.
expert though, so.
That's good, that's a very good point.
If I can just add, though, it was one of the criteria in the categories that was used to evaluate projects for
Yeah,
the capital
it-
plan.
It is.
So if there was grant funding available for that type of project, it was part of the new tool that used,
the Google Sheet
gave up
tool.
a composite score for projects.
Yep.
So they would get higher points if there was grant funding for that.
So we would be
Project.
more likely to prioritize
Yep.
an expenditure that there's opportunity for grant funding to
That's the
to
way
offset those
yeah.
costs.
Yeah.
That was one of many.
Yeah, the way it works is if somebody requested a capital plan, a capital project, and they came in and said that we can't get a grant for this, or, then the tool gives them more points. It puts them ahead of the list of other projects that don't have that characteristic. But we don't specifically look at, as a committee, look for it. It comes to us.
2 points in that regard. One is, number one, you're not guaranteed you're going to get the grant. So yes, it does give it a couple extra points,
Yeah.
but you're not guaranteed. Also, most grants for those types of projects are reimbursements, so the money has to be expended before you get the money from the grant anyway.
And that was a discussion at the end of the process that the capital planning committee had, that maybe they're going to rethink and examine that for next year.
Jay? Okay, and then just, again, for a point of clarification, and did I hear right that at some point through the rest of the process, there's $135,000 left to be appropriated?
Yes, an unallocated amount at
Okay.
this point.
Okay.
Is your intention to keep that unallocated, or
I was
is?
gonna,
No.
do we have to allocate that, or?
It wouldn't be my intention to keep it unallocated.
Okay.
It will likely, but I think that basically as we go through the process, I think it's just something they
Oh,
have
I'm
in the
sure we'll find a place
back
for
of
it.
our heads, yeah.
The important part is it gives us a cushion in case we can't rectify the snow, ice and snow removal through the regular budget. We've got
There's
that
also,
money.
yeah, and there's other potential warrant articles that could have
Correct.
funding impact.
Yeah,
as well.
and there could be another surprise from somebody saying, hey, guess what, this costs more than we thought.
Another
So,
$100,000 unfunded mandate.
or, you know, like Money Tech comes in higher than,
Right,
'cause
2.5.
usually they've been coming in lower and lower and lower, but I think, you know, I'm not sure what they're going to turn around with, so, I'm sorry.
Are we expecting an article this year for the demolition of the old primary school?
There is an article, it's for feasibility and design. I think that's how it's worded. That's what the Board of Selectmen voted. I don't have
Is
the
that-
exact wording on.
Was that feasibility and design for tearing it down, or to do
And to
the,
get real cost estimates for the demolition.
was there also one for asbestos removal?
We performed the hazardous materials asbestos survey,
Okay,
so that has been done
So-
very recently.
So to be clear, we're not expecting a vote that would ultimately end this discussion around the primary school and put it to bed. We're coming to another iterative decision?
Yeah, that's a very complicated question.
Okay.
The board will be meeting with different stakeholders, the planning board, the APDC, Architectural Preservation District Commission, but that is their plan. Their goal for this year was to go to town meeting with an article for that building.
And none of that is funded at this point?
As far as that amount, there's no dollar amount associated with that yet.
Okay.
then I'd open it up at this point. Is there anybody from the public that has any questions that they wanted to raise? Carl? Oh,
No, 84 Beauty.
I'm not really quite sure how to, let's see.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Carl Luck, 50 Sunset Lane. Yeah, first, it's a very good presentation, and it's a lot of good information, and we're still at a fairly high level, unfortunately. So my first question is, when will the line item detail that backs this up be available to the public?
I can put that on the website. I will be leaving for vacation tomorrow, so when I get back.
Okay, great. Great, thank you. So I get a vacation too then. Thank you. I had a similar observation on the excise tax that was asked, but I didn't quite fulfill my interest there. So I think what I heard was that $200,000 or $180,000, because in 2019, the actual, I assume this was the actual, the $1.85 million in excise tax was the actual for 18 that's in the presentation.
19 was actual.
I don't have it right here. I think I wrote it down right. And in 20, we budgeted $1,671,000-ish. So the $180,000 drop. So that wasn't because something happened? That's just we did a very conservative estimate?
We're keeping our local receipts estimate conservative, yes.
Okay. So with the $41,000 increase this year, we're still keeping it several $100,000 conservative.
Yeah, we don't have our fiscal 20 estimates, or actuals, until, the end of the year, once those figures are finalized.
So
And to point out as well, this, Karen probably has these numbers better than I do, but this year's actuals, the overall, overall net effect was a 0.22% increase overall. So even though our motor vehicle excise may have been higher than our estimates, overall it was only a 0.22% increase.
in what?
Local receipts.
Local receipts. Okay, so we're counting on a couple $100,000 of goodness from excise, is what I hear. So I just look, where's all this free cash coming from? And it's conservative estimates, and this is a 200,000. It's what 10% is awfully conservative. So maybe we got some real
Bring clarity.
The
Come on, Karen.
0.22% number that Heather was referring to was the overall increase in our revenue, all of our revenue, including real estate, personal property, everything, from our estimated versus our actual in FY19. The majority of our free cash that was certified for the close of FY19 was due to appropriation closeouts and not revenue surpluses.
And that was basically vacant positions.
Yeah,
And-
and changes in health insurance versus what we thought was going to happen. But, I mean, I think the closeout on the revenue side was about $800,000. So that was the majority of the free cash that was certified for June 30th of 19. It wasn't because we had surplus revenues that equated to $1 million. It was more on the appropriation closeout side than it was on the surplus revenue side.
And then-
And the other thing that I would caution with the revenue estimates is that we should be conservative with our local receipt estimates, because at some point, if we start bumping them up and bumping them up, we could potentially face a revenue deficit that would have to be raised in the next year. So, I mean, from my standpoint, I would keep those local receipt estimates as conservative as possible. And I mean, if the numbers that you were looking at on the slide that Heather did for FY18 and FY19, they are actual numbers. But if you compared the estimated numbers for those years to the numbers going out for 19, 20, and 21, we've increased what we've estimated in each one of those years, but the estimate is still lower than what we've actually received. But again, like Heather said in her presentation, they're elastic revenues that are very dependent on the economy, so if the economy goes sour, we're not going to see those receipts. So, again, in my
Okay,
opinion...
and then actually, just another point of clarification is, on the motor vehicle excise in particular, is that a number that we get once, or is that a number we get twice a year? Do we
I'm
get
not sure.
half and then the other half, or? is
No,
it-
well, there's commitments that are done from the Registry of Motor Vehicles all throughout the year.
Okay.
I mean, we typically get the largest one for the year that we're in the February timeframe.
right.
But we probably get 6, 7, 8 commitments before the close of the fiscal year.
Okay,
So it's ongoing throughout the year. And the FY20, I mean, we still get commitments even after the close of the fiscal year for calendar year 20, which would roll into the next year.
yeah, I can tell you I didn't buy a new car.
So out of curiosity, Karen, and you may not remember these numbers, but I'd just like to get a flavor. I think Carl and I are still both a little foggy on this, is, you know, FY 2018 after recap on motor vehicle excise is 1.789 million. And then it goes to 1.850 million in 2019. 2020, we've got an estimated number that reflects an almost $200,000 drop. I understand that that's a pie-in-the-sky number, it's an estimate. My question is historically, how far are our estimates from reality?
Well, they fluctuate. And I actually think that I sent the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen a history of the local receipts for like the last 10 years, where you would be able to see what was estimated and what was actually received. I don't have those numbers.
I'll go back
off
and
the-
look for that. Okay. I mean, because I'm, it's a big difference, right? Like, if we collected 1.85 million last year, and there's no economic indicator that people are not buying new vehicles in 2020 or in 2019 or 2020, and we're estimating for fiscal year 2021, $135,000 less than we collected last year. It just seems to, we've had an ongoing conversation about what generates free cash. And the fact that free cash is really, I mean, it's a good thing in one respect, but the other respect is it's cash that's effectively sitting there for an 18-month period in some cases, right? If we're collecting excise tax in February of this year and we're not allocating that money it's going to be certified in next year's free cash, and it'll be May of next year before we get around to town meeting, and before we decide what we're going to do with that free cash. So I understand the need to be conservative when we're estimating this kind of stuff, but we're creating, in being conservative, we're creating a $200,000 limbo for this money.
Well, I would agree in that one category of local receipts and in that one category of revenue, but I think you have to look at the revenue as a whole as well. So even though we had a surplus in our local receipts, if you look at our overall revenue for the year, there really wasn't that much of a surplus at all. So again, from my standpoint, I would be conservative as I could be.
Okay. Thank you.
I certainly agree with being conservative, but I also think we need to really work at understanding the budget, and if we've got $200,000 of goodness here that's eaten up somewhere else in the revenue, then we should be trying to figure out where is it that we're underestimating and try to fix that, as opposed to saying, well, hey, the system works, so let's just keep using it. The next one is on the regional dispatch. There's a increase of $27,000, and again, without the detail behind this, excuse me, I don't know what that is. So, could someone comment on what percentage that is? I don't even know what regional dispatch costs us a year. I don't think it's in the presentation. What percentage increase that is, and if it's more than a normal couple 3%, what's driving it? I'm sorry. That's okay. I missed a few back there, too. The regional dispatch increase of $27,000. What percent increase is that over what we're spending? And if it's more than a couple, 3%, what's driving it?
I think it's about a 20% increase right now.
Yeah, that's what it's looking like, because it's over 290,000. The last year's budget was 290,000, and this year's target budget is 317,000.
One of the things I will say is I'm on the finance committee for the Neshoba Valley Regional Dispatch. We're still in discussions with the executive director of the district to settle that number, and I would anticipate that number will come in lower than what you're seeing right there. I mean, I can't tell you, I think it's about a 20% increase right now, and every single community that's in that district
It looks slightly under 10%.
Negotiating that budget.
It looks under 10%.
I thought it was even higher than that. I may be mistaken, but
And maybe it's just because I'm looking at the final budget for FY20, and I don't know what the actual cost ended up being, but if the budget was 290 and the current budget is looking at 317, then it's an increase of 27,000 over 290,000.
that number should be finalized by the end of the month.
Still pretty good, pretty large.
It's what,
I thought it was
213?
213. I think you're looking at the full budget and not just
Looking at
that
total
regional.
radio watch?
Well, there's different components in that line.
I'm sorry,
So,
okay, yes, then I am looking at the wrong thing.
so it's
Okay.
not just the assessment that's in
Thank
the
you.
number that you're looking at. But I can tell you that we are in discussion with the executive director, trying to settle that number for 21, and I would think that it would come in lower than what you're seeing in the
So-
current preliminary
So
budget.
the key thing, and I'm sure I'm happy you're on it, Karen, is anything happened that's driving that, or is that just,
Well, I know one of the things that happened was they just negotiated a contract with their union that, I think it went back to, they hadn't settled a contract since, I believe it was fiscal 2018. So there were numbers, yes, yeah. I think it was mostly driven by that. But I think what's going to end up happening is that they are going to approach the state to try to get more grant funds to offset some of those increased labor costs, and as a result, that'll reduce the assessment that you see right now.
thank you very much, Karen. Okay, so my next one, that's kind of queued that up, great, because Grant, there was a little discussion, and I didn't catch every word, but I think I got the gist on the Education and Reinforcement Coordinator. Yep. You with me? Okay. I think I heard that this is something we're sharing, $30,000-ish job. I guess there's two questions. One is, you mentioned grant, so the grant that we would fund that with, we've already received, so that's already in the bank?
Yes.
Super, thank you, easy question.
Well, the matching portion. No,
We-
not the
we-
grant that from the Mass DEP, that would have to be applied for.
There's another,
Okay,
there's more
so
than-
there's, the position is a grant-funded position that's through Mass DEP, and the grant is for 75% of the costs. So the grant is for part-time or full-time. We're looking at the part-time grant, which is $30,000 in all, would be shared with 2 other communities, so we'd be splitting our match, which comes out to a couple thousand for each year, for 2 years.
And so the real question I'm mostly interested in is there an expectation that that's going to be a contract person? I mean, you wouldn't hire somebody that is based on grant funding, would we?
I don't know the answer to that yet. This is still preliminary, so that detail hasn't been,
Right, if there's a position, I'm going to assume that one of the 3 towns would create the position. If it's a
Right.
contracted service, then the 3 districts would go into a cooperative purchase, I would assume, for the contract services.
right.
Yeah, and I mean, something like this sounds like it should be a contract, because you can't count on grants. So I would hope, I'll leave it there, that we wouldn't support hiring even a piece of somebody or making a long-term commitment to a piece of somebody just because we have grant funding for the first year.
Okay.
If we're allowed to have it as a contracted position, there's certain laws in play that, that if that is a position that typically would do that services, and if they're reporting on out, if you direct them to be, they have to be here during this time,
Yeah,
then, then
Yeah.
it couldn't be.
Okay.
It's
So,
already,
So I would hope I would hope if it's not allowed to do a contract, we would not pursue this.
excuse me, if you don't mind, Mr. Luck, is this something, Heather, that you anticipate is going to shake out more over the course of the next couple of months before town meeting? Is that what I'm coming on?
We have our meeting with the Board of Health on March 2nd. So if the Board of Health does not, is not in favor of doing comprehensive hauler regulations, then
Doesn't make sense.
doesn't, yeah.
Do we anticipate that there'll be some downstream cost savings associated with this when it comes to our recycling costs?
Well, this would be for private haulers.
Right,
So
but the unspoken reality of what's happening here is that everybody who's using a private hauler in Lunenburg who is not providing recycling is using town recycling for free and is
That's a
being,
good point.
and is basically siphoning off the bag-paying and tax-paying public of Lunenburg for their recycling.
Very good point.
So if they are recycling.
It could
as
reduce
part of
our
it, it could
town
potentially-
appropriation, yes.
Thank you. The look ahead is great. I appreciate that. Both those charts. The only thing, and no surprise here, that I would appreciate is the Excel sheet behind it, because I can't understand everything, and I would spend too much time here trying to ask the questions of understanding where these numbers come from, because there's one thing the one thing I'm trying to understand is when I look at, I guess one question is, are those charts, as they're filled out now and their assumptions, are they based on the same assumptions as the 5-year plan? The 5-year forecast, particularly related to debt exclusion?
So in the forecast, it doesn't project future debt, but it does those that, for the fiscal '21 amount, it has the current known debt.
Yeah, but the excluded debt it should be the same, because because we already know what's already been excluded.
It's all our known
All
debt amounts,
known.
not,
Should be,
it doesn't
yes.
project other
It
projects.
doesn't project new stuff
Yeah.
that hasn't
Yeah.
happened yet, and it hasn't hit the tax rolls,
Okay.
right?
Good. So it's basically the same methodology as the 5-year
Yes.
forecast, in that it just lets the debt fall out and doesn't add debt.
Right.
So
Shows capacity.
shows,
Yeah.
well, but not the capacity one, I understand the capacity one.
Okay.
It's the next one I don't understand, that shows the sort of projected tax rate. And based on not taking on new debt, and I'm sure we all saw and felt every increase that, came in with new debt in our taxes, just kept jumping up. Those debts are going away clearly, because in the 5-year forecast between '23 and '24, there's $1 million drop in debt, but I don't see that in the tax rate. I would expect, I never see that come back in the tax rate. I would expect to see between '23 and '24 some goodness impact to the tax rate, but I don't see any. So, and maybe it's just because I don't understand it, and maybe Karen could help me through it once I get the spreadsheet, but is there something, shouldn't I see the debt coming back to us?
You're right. I had the same observation.
I think it has, it uses 2.5% escalator for the levy limit.
Well, the only change that I see that goes down at all is going to be between 2023 and '24.
Yeah, but it's $1 million.
But so the 5-year tax rate is just looking at the property tax. Karen, correct me. So it's projecting out based on our property tax limit. So it's putting in assumptions about your base tax rate, your new growth, and your debt exclusions, which those are the amounts that we know at this time, and giving you your maximum allowable levy. It's not taking into account expenditures. You're looking at 5 rate.
That one,
Yeah.
I think it's going
That's what I need to
to be one
understand.
of those sheets that we're going to have to take a look
Yeah.
at and mull over, and then come back
Not
to.
on the expenditure side, so it has debt exclusions, because that's added into your maximum allowable levy.
Right, when they go away, though, the levy should go down. It goes up for sure when we add.
But, so this is just the debt exclusion amounts that we know at this time.
So that's why I said,
Yeah.
could Karen or someone, even in your absence, send me those Excel sheets, and I'm sure if I can see the equations, I can figure out what's going on.
Okay.
And my very last thing, and I was happy to hear the capital discussion and that the grants are looked at, but just out of curiosity, does anyone know if any of the capital that was on the list checked the grant box? Because I think it's very difficult for people who are doing this to understand when grants are available, and it's a whole hell of a lot easier to not check the box and not get the questions. So I'm happy to hear that process is there, but it may need some work to actually use it. So,
I don't have that information right now, but I can't get it to you, Carl.
yeah, okay, great. I probably know the answer, it's more of a comment. Great, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Rogers?
Dave Rogers, 82 Highland Street. The MSBA expense in 2023 of $535,000, is that a reimbursement that we get?
Yes.
Okay,
So
so,
it's on our debt schedule, and we get a reimbursement.
okay, so that's to be construed as income then?
Yep, it's on both sides.
So it's a wash? Okay, that's what I was concerned about, okay. The $135,000 that was made reference to, I'd like to know generally, what kind of expenses we could see increased that might eat that up, like insurance, Worcester County retirement, that kind of thing. Is that towards the end of this month or next month?
No, so health insurance we will only see a decrease if there is one, because the 3.7%.
Okay.
For active employees was our maximum rate
Okay.
increase. The 5% retirees is the estimate used at this
Okay.
time. We don't know that. That's a calendar year base when those renewals, so we won't know that actual amount till next October-ish timeframe. Worcester County retirement, we already received our assessment amount, so that the budget includes the actual.
okay.
So we estimated 10%, it came in about 11%. So we do not have Montytech's assessment
Right.
yet. We do not have the regional dispatch
Okay.
final figure yet.
You did? Okay.
The school budget is still, hasn't been voted. We don't have that final number, which is subject to change once we get our actual health insurance number too.
Sure.
We'll see a decrease. Those are really, governor, on the revenue side, it would be the state aid number.
Okay, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but basically, there's not an awful lot of wiggle room here. I mean, there's a few things here, but it's nothing that's going to be either one way or the other.
Right. What we don't have included in this budget.
Snow.
Snow and ice is a major one.
Yep.
Warrant articles.
Right.
That have funds that need to be appropriated. We did not allocate any money towards the special purpose stabilization fund that we have in previous years.
Right.
And that comes from free cash. But we had to use more free cash towards the capital plan. Whereas previous years, we've used more tax revenue towards the capital
Sure.
plan. So those are the kind of differences.
Okay. The reason I'm asking these questions is just to kind of get a better feel for where we are in the shucking and the jiving, so-called. And that's helpful. You touched on it, but the articles, the other night at the selectmen's meeting, I was surprised when discussion was preliminary about the purchasing the land in front of the public safety building. We had passed over that article, and I thought it was dead. So that type of thing. What other kind of, and when will we find out what kind of articles we will have to look down the barrel of?
So the warrant closes March 16th. That'll
Okay.
be when all the articles need to be submitted by, and then the selectmen review them. As long as they're not citizen petitions, they can't remove those from
Sure.
the warrant. There's a possibility that some would be removed from the final warrant. The land in front of the public safety building, at the special town meeting, it was decided to remove that article because there were questions that were not fully answered at that time. So it was postponed to take up discussion at a later time. So that is still a possible article. The streetlights, converting those to LED, the Green Communities group is meeting in a couple weeks. They met once last week, and they're looking at either, there's two options, one to pay Unitil to convert the streetlights to LED, or, which would be a direct savings, or purchase the streetlights, and then we would have to pay to
Have them
convert
installed,
them to LED.
Okay. The reason I'm asking these kind of off the beaten path questions is it all comes together for how much we can afford to spend and what the dollar amounts are going to be. And it's like preaching to the choir, but do we have any pending legal decisions that would have a monetary impact on the towns?
No.
No, okay. The Turkey Hill School, that issue has to be taken care of. We have to take care of the town hall, the patios, the brooks, the primary. And at the selectmen's meeting, the sidewalks, that's a 5-year thing that we didn't know about that's coming in. And it might not be big dollars, but it's all part and parcel of what we're doing. And it's not like we have a plethora of extra bucks. And that's why I started off with this 135. It's going to be, bye-bye. So this is a great start, and it's a great roadmap. And one last comment, and I don't want to get in the middle of a big political fight here. But there was a discussion about coming up with some kind of a number for what we could afford. And there's a certain chain of thought that, well, how can you do that if you don't know? Well, it's kind of like if you're going to buy a house, and you go to a mortgage broker, and he or she says, well, based upon all of this is what you can afford. Well, it's the same kind of a thing. We should have some kind of a idea about what we can afford, and then plug that number in, because we've got some things that we have to come up with in terms of dollars, okay? So I think it's very, very important that we have some idea about that. I did a quick sheet with the help of some other town employees that gave me some numbers, and, you know, it can be done. So I think that's something that this group and the town manager will have to deal with. Thank you.
Yeah, and
That's
actually,
it.
just to go back to it, it was one of the recommendations of a board member to do a debt project that reviews debt and looks at potential projects and
Yeah.
what that might mean and all of that. It's basically finding the timing to do that.
Of course.
But the other question that I had, as you were talking, how confident are we that we're going to receive the smart growth?
Not very.
That's probably the correct answer.
You know everything, so we just ask. There was a
It is in the governor's proposal,
Okay,
so.
so it made it that far? Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I know that that's one of those, since there's only 2 towns that get it, that is, you know, I know it's been reduced over time. I wanted to, that's a $35,000 number. Any other questions from anybody in the public? All right, I see that there's still cookies and there's still San Quentin cake, so try to take something before you leave, because the building is closed for the weekend.
The mice will feast.
There's that too. Again, yeah, I would also like to thank you for a very good presentation. I understood most of it.
Very good.
I'm getting to the point where I'm getting better. And with that, we'll move on from the budget. Is there any other report from the finance director or the town manager for us this evening? Any good news? No bad news, just good news.
Just an update on snow and ice at the beginning of the week. There's approximately 43,000.
That's our deficit that we're into? Okay.
43,000
Well, that's not too bad
in
yet.
deficit, so.
I know I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry.
All right.
Comes
All
the
right,
snow.
the next item on our agenda, funding new collective bargaining positions. Dave?
Yep. A few things have happened just in the last few hours of today, but I'll start out with the brief history of the issue I brought forward. 2 members of this committee questioned this process during the warrant presentation previous to special town meeting. I was on town meeting floor and also questioned the process, and that was in regards to passing over the article which would have, quote, end quote, funded the first year of the Patrolmen's Association collective bargaining contract. To this day, I still, or through this day, up to this day, I still question whether that was the proper process. We have since received a response back from Labor Council that is now saying that it was not proper and that the situation will be corrected at annual town meeting with the vote on town meeting floor. There's still some discrepancy, as everybody's been saying through this process, that you put 3 attorneys in a room with the same document and they come up with 3 different determinations. I plan to pursue a little bit more a clear interpretation of the Mass General Law that affects this, and I clearly hope that where we are voting on it to correct what appears to be something we did incorrectly the first time, that it be our common practice from here on forward that we take all collective bargaining agreements to town meeting floor, even if they don't require a transfer from salary reserve to fund the contract. I think that's the cleanest way. It's most transparent, and it gives us a chance to give the town a good look at what was agreed to within the contract, within the legal limits of what could be discussed. It's not to take away from the negotiation process or anything like that. That's the Board of Selectmen and/or, I was going to step into an area that I don't want to go there, so I'm going to back off from that. But the Selectmen are the entity that approves, basically votes to approve the final agreement, but town meeting is the funding entity for those agreements. So whether we need to transfer money or not from a salary account is really irrelevant. We need to vote on town floor that we agree to fund the collective bargaining agreement.
Okay, any questions on that at all? Any comments? Nothing?
I first of all, I want to applaud you, Dave, for pursuing this and doggedly pursuing it after, I had made a call to the Attorney General's office on this and got a different answer several months ago.
They kind of pushed us both off.
But, the reality is that I think that this, what we're trying to achieve here, or what we would hope to achieve here, is good background music.
Great, yeah.
What I didn't know about you.
What we're hoping to achieve here is checks and balances, really, and I don't think that anybody is looking to undercut the authority of the Board of Selectmen, but the reality is that town meeting is the, somebody throw that out a window. The town meeting's job is to appropriate funds. And the Board of Selectmen has the authority through collective bargaining to obligate the town to pay for something over a very long period of time that town meeting has not necessarily signed on to. And so, I think that it's only fair that there at least be some sort of opportunity for town meeting to consent to that obligation.
Right. The other part of the, I didn't choose to read all the verbiage of the paragraph that this comes under in Mass General Law, but it also states that if that vote were negative, then it forces the collective bargaining agreement back to negotiation. And what brought this to mind way back in September or October, was remembering that in the city of Boston, now I understand they're a city, they have a mayor and city council, but there was a negotiated firefighters contract that the city council refused, and it went back for negotiation for a number of months before they came up with a final collective bargaining agreement. And that's what this gives the town meeting that option. If they really do not like what was negotiated, then they vote no, and it goes back for renegotiation.
One other comment is I don't anticipate this to be a discussion about the merits of the, I happen to believe this is an excellent contract.
Oh, I do too, and I've said that at most meetings.
But I think that this is a worthwhile exercise and worth going through this process to get it right, so that if this ever happens where it's not a great contract, or it's something that, we're in a period of high interest rates or skyrocketing labor costs or something along those lines, the town really needs to have its voice heard, and we should set ourselves up so that we have a process whereby the town meeting's voters have their voices heard.
Right, but it speaks to the checks and balances that are built into that section of the Mass General Law.
Okay. Thanks. Public comment from the committee. Public comment from the public. Then if there's, we do not have minutes for tonight. I do have to apologize. We hadn't gotten our minutes posted, and the town clerk's office chased us down, and that was on.
They're posted.
I'm sorry?
They're posted.
But they're posted now, yes. They've made their way. We had been approving them all along. I had a miscue with who was actually getting them in the hands of the town clerk, but they're all set now.
Could I interject?
I'm sorry?
Could I interject really quickly?
Sure.
Since my comments at the Board of Selectmen's meeting in regards to minutes being posted, I've also had a conversation with the town clerk's office, and they were already in the process of reviewing what information they did not have at the request of the town manager previous to Tuesday's meeting, unbeknown to me. So the process was already in the works. It's just, a lot of times we don't know what's going on in the background, and the only way to find out is to make a public comment and then see what flies back at us. So, thank you.
Okay. Next meetings, next week. We're now into weekly meetings. All of our department hearings are going to be starting at 6:30 PM all the way through the season. On the budget schedule, we will also be setting up just in case, as we did last year, for potential Monday night meetings, if there's a snow day. So people are, so if you happen to see more than one meeting posted, it's because it's got to be posted in time for Monday night, which would mean that it would have to be posted probably prior to when the Thursday night meeting would have happened. So we'll just try to get it canceled on Monday if we happen to have had it on Thursday. Other than that, I don't believe that there's too much more to say. So I will be happy to accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
No worries. Mr. Rogers. That's something.